let's move on. We got some exciting housing policy.
Yes, we've got wins for YIMBYs. I saw this in a Bloomberg article recently. It's not one piece of news that particularly just happened. It's more looking at 2023 in general. And it seems like the YIMBY movement, and that's yes in my backyard, it's opposition to not in my backyard, for those of you who don't know. It seems that they've really gone national, and that's super exciting. There's a ton of states that have introduced bills or whole packages looking to tackle their housing crises and the housing crisis in the country at large, but with a lot of different zoning reform. So I'm just going to go through a few of those examples right now. In California, where you would kind of expect this thing to happen, Governor Gavin Newsom signed a package of 56 bills. These included reforms or extending existing reforms to make it easier to build accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and apartments. So that makes it easier if people have a bunch of property and want to build some additional homes off of it. That's what ADUs are. The allowing for more apartment building is a good counterbalance to the amount of single family zoning that has been present in the state for so long. It's also closed loopholes that localities used to block housing. One example that I really liked here was that a city's governing body could order additional environmental review for a development without specific cause, delaying projects by years, and one of these new laws closed this. So our first episode that we ever did, we talked about zoning reform. One of the reasons that these zoning laws ever came into place, I mean, there are a few reasons, and a lot of them have been racially motivated, motivated by discrimination, but another reason has been to protect the environment. And now these municipal level governments are abusing those environmental protection rules to delay home building processes and instead just keep property values higher.
Right. And we know now that denser living is more environmentally friendly.
Yes.
We know that is, it's not building more does not hurt the environment. We've learned exactly the opposite. Building more makes the environment, it makes us much more resilient to climate change, and it really lowers all of our carbon footprints, because when you're living closer together, you're walking to more places.
Yes.
You're taking more public transit. You're not utilizing cars as much. You maybe live closer to your job. These are all different things that when you live in a more denser environment, your carbon footprint goes down. So limiting the environmental reviews up front for these type of more dense housing production is the smartest thing they could do.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's perfect. And so nationwide, then we've seen over 200 bills to reform zoning introduced in at least 23 states, and that was just in 2023. That's huge.
That's massive.
And this isn't just blue states where this is happening. One of the states which passed a big zoning package was Montana, which is a very red state. Migration into Montana has been sharply rising since the onset of the pandemic, and so the government wanted to get ahead of that to prepare and not have its housing market kind of overrun. So this package legalizes backyard ADUs, it allows apartments in commercial areas, and a ton of other zoning reforms to make it easier to build there.
In Montana, it's so interesting because there is a real strong libertarian movement in Montana. And the libertarians in the Montana House, and even the more libertarian side of the Republican Party in the Montana House, sided with the Democrats in the Montana House to get a lot of these things passed. It was a real bipartisan effort here where Democrats and Republicans both agreed.
Yeah.
And there are some speeches that you would hear from some people in the House, in the Massachusetts, in the Montana legislature, and you think like, oh man, that guy made a lot of good points, and then you look him up and he's a Republican, and, there's a lot of other things you would disagree with him on, at least I would, but on this one, he's dead to rights.
Yeah. I feel like ideologically, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for Democrats and Republicans to be split on housing. Republicans, you think about, is the free market party, right? Restricting a bunch of housing building doesn't fit into that bucket.
No.
So it really, what makes more sense is property owners, old property owners versus young renters, right? That's where the split lies, and there can be Democrats and Republicans on either side of that divide.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. I think like also there's a dichotomy between free market liberalism, like a libertarian or right wing economist belief, right, and conservatism and reactionaryism, right? Being a reactionary, conservatism, I don't know necessarily dictates believing in a free market solution. Conservatism just means conserving what's present.
Yep.
Right. So if our local community is a single family zoning place and we don't have any duplex or triplexes and we don't have public transit that runs through our community, they want to conserve what's currently there. Mm-hmm. They don't want to change it.
Yeah.
And in this case, the free market, in the national level, the free market is the ally to conservatism because that is what we basically currently have.
Yes.
But at these local levels, when we have these, structures of poor zoning laws and overbearing environmental regulations that really aren't good for the environment at all, that's where the free market and the free market side of right-wing economics and stuff allies with capital L liberalism pretty good.
Yeah, it pushes for change rather than staying the same.
Right.
Totally. And so there are a bunch of other states. I said 23, but just to show you kind of the range of the political spectrum that they cover, Vermont, one of the bluest states there is, Texas, Rhode Island, Florida, Arkansas, Ohio, North Carolina, Washington. It's all over the country, all across the spectrum. YIMBYism really is winning out. It seems we've talked about unions having a moment right now. It feels like the YIMBY movement is having their moment right now as well.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really exciting. There were some failures, some pretty high-profile failures. New York, Arizona, and Colorado saw some partisan squabbling and resistance from the rich suburbanites, as always, preventing anything from passing, anything substantial. But the general consensus here is that this is a big step. What we've seen with the union movement, right, is that it starts somewhere. It starts with UAW and the big three, and then they decide that they're about to move on to the big five, the big six, and more. I think that's what we're seeing with the YIMBY movement as well.
Yeah, I want to comment on two things. So in New York, how it fails, right? It's interesting because my parents are Republican, and they are definitely anti-Kathy Hochul, who was the governor of New York. But Kathy Hochul's plan had so much resistance from rich Democrats, like so much resistance from rich suburban Democrats, and she couldn't find a coalition to make happy. She could not rally enough working class people to support this type of zoning reform that would offset the damage being done to her base pretty much in suburban areas in New York. So that's one example where Democrats shot themselves in the foot and are hurting our housing supply. New York has the room and it has the best transit system in the country. If there's any place where we should be building more affordable and more housing, period, near transit stations, it should be in New York.
Yeah.
We have so many Long Island Railroad stops, and each one of them should come right next to an affordable housing unit. More zoning, laxer zoning requirements. So we have triplexes, duplexes, multifamily housing right there.
Yeah. Totally.
And then the last thing is I want to talk about, what's been going on in Massachusetts with regards to zoning, because last year or so, they passed the MBTA Communities Act, which means that communities that are on the MBTA public transit system of Massachusetts are required to zone for an additional 7,000 units or so. And the type of zoning is very, very specific. Like you have to be the right to build, that these companies and developers have the right to build on this land. So there aren't many, things that the local government can do to stop and slow down the development of these projects. Now, and the MBTA CA has been very controversial in a lot of towns across Massachusetts because each different locality affected by the act has to pass their own plan on how they will compromise with it. In Brookline recently, we just passed a plan in which we will be compliant and also have very, very meaningful development along the MBTA rail system here. So really good stuff. We zoned for 2,000 more units.
Yeah.
And those will all be, built over the course of a decade and a half. So it's good.
Yeah. Very exciting.
It's really cool.